I'm Kyle Swan in the philosophy department. I'm very pleased to introduce Holmes Rolston III. He's University Distinguished Professor and Professor Emeritus at Colorado State University. Professor Rolston is best known for his work on and has been called the father of environmental ethics.
But that's been changed.
Don't ruin my introduction, sir.
The grandfather of
Even better. Today, the focus is a bit different, and we're going slightly further back than the beginning of environmental ethics, though. All the way back, I guess we should say. And we'll listen to him talk about three big things. Join me in welcoming Professor Rolston.
Well, thank you. It's, let's see, I better get wired up. It's a pleasure to be in Singapore. I've been in many parts of Asia, but never in Singapore before, so I was pleased to get this invitation. I've been here 2 or 3 days and am duly impressed. So it's a cordial invitation for which I'm grateful. Today we're going to talk about everything. We're going to talk about 3 big bangs. Thursday I will be more specific about environmental ethics. In a way, the two go together kind of nicely. This is sort of the more inclusive or comprehensive talk. And Thursday, I suppose, is inclusive enough. It has to do with the future of life on Earth. But anyway, that's the game plan for lectures today and again on Thursday. Once upon a time, Plato said that what a scientist, what a philosopher likes to do is to carve nature at the joints. Those of you who've ever carved a chicken or a turkey or a pig, know that you sort of like to do the carving, but you like to hit the spots where the bones actually pivot and turn. Well, what I would want to say I'm going to do is to carve nature at the explosions. 3 big bangs. Everybody knows the first one, the kind of original startup of this universe, but maybe you'd be pushed to say what the second and third were. I think there's been an explosion of life on Earth, if you like. Genetic natural history. Third one? Well, the third one is right there in Kyle's head, right here. It's the human mind in nature. Well, a Big Bang is a kind of a metaphor, so maybe we could be a bit more specific about that. You don't want to twist your neck the whole evening.
I got this.
Oh, you're going to watch it up there?
Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Didn't pick that up. So we're talking about sort of radical changes that change the whole possibility state into novel new opportunities, if you like. Sometimes scientists these days talk about singularities. 3 big singularities. And as we go along, I might want to warn against what I might call thinking that rare things are unimportant. Philosophers may do that at times, I find on my campus scientists often think rare things are quite important because they reveal something unique, something distinctive, something particular. Okay. Well, let's think a little bit about a cosmic Big Bang. That's where we are most familiar with the phrase. About 13 billion years ago, there is this singularity when the universe began, and it sort of instantly inflated. Inflation, the size of the universe, faster than the speed of light. Nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, but we're told that nevertheless space might have inflated faster than the speed of light. We've kind of got a cosmic fireball. We've got inflation, compounding explosion, and we think we've got a universe that continues to expand from that day to this. May be that the conditions at the start of this universe were unique. A fancy word for that is idiographic. Nevertheless, this universe turned out to be in many respects law-like or nomothetic. We may even have physicists who think they can give us a theory of everything. We'll return a bit to that idea. So we've got a kind of surprising cosmic singularity, and Paul Davies, Australian-British astronomer, cosmologist, says we hit the cosmic jackpot. We have a universe that's just right for life. Well, it could be interesting. And you may say, well, is it really explosive? Whether we still think when we look out at the night sky that the universe is exploding is a sort of matter of perspective. And yet, we do have a universe of great age that continues to expand. And by some accounts, the expansion is speeding up now. We know more about dark energy, dark matter, and so forth. Okay, there's a certain tendency to say, wait a minute, the universe is much too big. And yet, the astronomers who look at it, here's John Barrow, say, well, the vast size, the huge age, the empty space, all of these are necessary for us being here. The universe wasn't about as old as it is. I couldn't be giving this lecture this afternoon. Much of that comes under the term anthropic principle. That's kind of a human-centered word. I wish it might have been called a biogenic principle, that the universe is in some sense right for life, as well as being right for humans. Well, let's think about that a bit. There are four fundamental forces that hold the world together, and you know two of them all the time: gravity, electromagnetism. You may not think every day or even have heard of the weak and strong nuclear force. These are inside the nucleus. But these are the four fundamental forces that sort of hold things together. And it turns out they have to be about what they are. again, for us to be here. The electron is a very large particle, lightweight but large. The proton is a very dense particle, small, dense, and the charge on them is identical, for example, for reasons we do not well understand, but if they weren't identical, we couldn't have ordinary chemistry. There is a feature called the cosmological constant, which is abbreviated by the Greek letter lambda. It's a small number. Actually, it's a pretty small number, written as an ordinary decimal. Pretty small number. Pretty small number. But it can't be zero and have the kind of universe that we now have. Martin Rees, probably best known astronomer today in the United Kingdom. Lambda, the weakest force in nature, most mysterious, controls the universe's expansion, and our existence requires that lambda not be too large. The equations we have about it predict that it should be about 120 times as big as it is, for example. So it's a good thing. It's small, but it's not zero. Oh, there's another one called the fine structure constant, often abbreviated alpha. It too is a small number. Here is a fraction. It controls the strength of the electromagnetic force, and if you change it by a few percent, you can't have any carbon made in the stars, and therefore no protein chemistry. In fact, the ratio of carbon to oxygen is striking. You know, if we're going to be here, you need carbon. Life is carbon-based. If I'm going to finish this lecture, I need oxygen to breathe. Well, they both have to be formed in the stars, and yet the way in which they are formed deals with a certain kind of fine-tuning. And here's Fred Hoyle, Sir Fred Hoyle, who discovered these things, remarking, figuring out the ratio of carbon-oxygen formation. Looks like some super calculating intellect has designed the carbon atom, or we wouldn't have such an atom by accident. You say the carbon atom is a fix. Somebody has monkeyed with the physics. Hoyle was not a believer in God. And yet he said, well, the physics looks like somebody might have set it up that way. Else we couldn't have carbon and oxygen in proportion suitable for life on Earth or elsewhere in the universe. See, the general idea is that we're all fossil stardust. Everything in your body, my body, everything in this room, everything on this planet, heavier than hydrogen and lithium, was made in the stars with a long cooking time. So if you want to feel good this evening, think of yourself as fossil stardust, or if you're having an unhappy day, you could call yourself nuclear waste. Well, maybe you could say yes, and this activity in the stars is automatic, self-organizing. Now in a star there's no self, but spontaneously organizing. but it produces heavy elements in suitable proportions for there to be planets, for there to be an Earth, and Peter Ward, Don Brownlee, paleontology at the University of Washington, say, in some sense, Earth got it just right. Got these elements out of the stars to be a place in which life can evolve. Well, a philosopher, a physicist wonders, is a way in which you could say that all this was inevitable, or is all this surprising? And I don't think we have a straight answer to that. Some of it looks like it might have been predictable. For example, if you get into a chemistry lecture hall here, you're going to have a periodic table. And you might say that a clever physicist right after the Big Bang could have predicted the periodic table of the elements. You probably could say that a good mineralogist, a crystallographer could have predicted right after the Big Bang there would be 32 crystal glasses. You might have said that a good chemist seeing hydrogen, seeing oxygen, could have said, well, those two can go together and form a water molecule, which will be polar. That means it has a positive charge on one end, a negative charge on the other. I think you might have said, well, somebody who sees that the stars are forming these elements can realize there are going to be planets, there are going to be asteroids, there could be rivers, there could be canyons, there could be oceans. So maybe you could say that a lot of the things that we see around us are sort of front-loaded into the system. That's to say, they were sort of built into the Big Bang, or the way the universe unfolded after the Big Bang. But there are a lot of things about which I don't think you can say that. If you can imagine some people from out of space having a space trip and they fly by Saturn and they say, oh, it's an interesting planet, it's got rings around it. They can fly by Jupiter and say, hey, that's got a great red spot. They fly by Mars and say, that's pretty boring, it's dry, doesn't look like there's any water there. And one of them turns to the other and says, well, guess what? Elephant's coming up. Earth is coming up, and I can't wait to see the elephants. I don't think that's possible. That's to say, I don't think elephants are sort of front-loaded into the system that we have. Roger Penrose, a cosmologist, British cosmologist, mathematician, we had an extraordinarily special Big Bang. Well, in contrast, another quite good cosmologist, Steve Weinberg. Well, now this is Martin Rees again. Martin Rees just won the Templeton Prize. Maybe we can write E equals MC squared on T-shirts or some sort of fundamental property one day that fixes the properties of the four fundamental forces of nature, but it would still be interesting even if it was a fact, it would still be a startling fact that we had the kind of universe that is a kind of setup for our existence. It's not guaranteed that simple equations permit complex consequences. Now, Steve Weinberg did have a different conclusion. He sort of got back, wrote a book about the first 3 minutes, and said, well, the universe seems pointless. But many think, well, no, it looks in a way like the startup of the universe producing the heavy elements, gathering them into planets on Earth, maybe many more such planets. Looks like it might be a kind of setup. On Earth, now, the second Big Bang. I'm going to call it an information explosion. And we have here a schematic of this marvelous molecule which forms DNA and permits the evolution of life, the genesis of life. Well, I don't always agree with Richard Dawkins, but sometimes I do. Dawkins says that there's a way in which Earth is kind of like a supernovae, only it's an information explosion, not an explosion of materials. On Earth now, I'm saying, is a perspective we can take in which there's a kind of explosion of life here. Here's M.J. Benton. He's a geologist, University of Bristol. Look at what we've got. Microbes, plants, animals, fungi, marine life, continental life. It's an exponential increase since the end of the Precambrian. Or Steve Stanley, he's University of Hawaii, Manoa, paleontologist. Again, an exponential increase. Here speaking of marine life. Or here's a Dutch paleontologist, long been at the University of California, Davis. Escalation characterizes the evident history of life. Here's a chemist, won a Nobel Prize. How remarkable is life? Very. The chemists really know nothing like it. How could it be that any cell sort of arises from the sludge of the earth? Must have happened, so it must be possible, but it seems very, very improbable. If you ask Lynn Margulis, once married to Carl Sagan, an eminent scientist in her own right, she's one of the proponents of the Gaia hypothesis. She says to get from a bacterium to people is easier than to get from a bacterium, well, to get from a bacterium to people, that seems like a long ways, is easier than to get from a mixture of amino acids to a simple bacteria. We may, we don't yet, we may reach plausible accounts of the origin of life. We have some sort of halfway plausible accounts. but it's still going to be a surprise. It's still going to be a marvelous beginning of the explosion of life. Well, I studied physics when I went to school, physics and math. And those guys said, look, Ralston, there's two kinds of things. There's matter and there's energy. But Einstein's come around and Einstein says, oh, well, we can put them together. So there's matter and energy. I said, fine, and I passed my test and graduated in physics. But every now and then, I went over to the biologist, and those guys said, wait a minute, Ralston, there's matter and energy. That's what you hear about in the physics department. But the biologists have got something else. They've got information. Information. And I said, oh, there's information on the moon. You can go up there and tell which crater. You can read the history of the moon from the way the meteors fell on the surface. And they said, no, that's not biological information. That's not real information. What we mean is proactive information about how to compose and elaborate vital structures and processes. We're talking about directed use. We're talking about information that can escalate and cross critical thresholds. And there's nothing like that in physics and chemistry. But biology is impossible without it. And if I began to talk to them about some big numbers, about billions of stars, galaxies, they said, wait a minute, if you want big numbers, talk to biologists. You need to learn about the combinatorial explosion. Yes, astronomy's got some big numbers. 10 to the 80th power is sometimes said to be the number of protons in the universe. But in biology, they said, we got immense numbers. Immense is often said to be 10 to the 110th power. Well, how do you get an immense number? You just look at a protein molecule that's 100 amino acids long, and you ask, how many different permutations can you make of that protein molecule? And you can make an immense number. And most protein molecules are twice that long. If you look at a typical DNA strand in mammals, how many ways can you rearrange that strand? Well, 10 raised to the 10 to the 8th power. These are hyper immense numbers. I'll give you some sense of this maybe. I'm in front of a computer keyboard. How many different sentences could you type on a keyboard? My keyboard's got, 26 letters, uppercase, lowercase. It's got periods and spaces and some numbers, maybe 125 letters. So I could write a couple dozen sentences and it'd be finished. I could write a couple thousand sentences and it'd be finished. 10,000? Million? Right? How many sentences, how many novels could be written on a typewriter keyboard? You get the idea that there's really no limit. Maybe it's not infinite in the technical sense, right? But it can go on indefinitely. See, now that's the idea the biologists are saying about life on Earth. It has this sort of immense possibility space. So nature on Earth is ringing the changes on these immense possibilities and exploring adapted fit. We can speak, as Andrew Knoll, a Harvard paleontologist, does, of Earth's immense evolutionary epic, which abounds, as he says, in both verve and mystery. Well, in which we've got two kinds of explosions. We've got an explosion of biodiversity, and we've got an explosion of complexity. Here's J.W. Valentine, a UC Berkeley paleontologist. Kind of complicated language, but and here he's looking in the oceans first. More and more numerous units at all levels of the hierarchy. The biosphere has become a splitter's paradise. All right. But he turns around and continues. Kind of biological improvement upon a background that gets wet, gets dry, gets cold, warms up, yes, fluctuating background, but it's a kind of gradually rising average complexity. Well, you may say, if I learned anything about evolution, it's pretty slow. In fact, Niles Eldridge and others think that a lot of evolution doesn't move at all. It's got a kind of stasis to us. That's part of the truth. But part of the truth is that many of these biological processes are very rapid. Partly because the biological processes use enzymes. They are catalytic. There are things called allosteric enzymes in your body at this moment that multiply natural processes by millions of times. By 10 raised, the fastest of them, 10 raised to the 20th power faster than would be the case without these enzymes. We may have mothers in the audience. We do have a mother in the audience. The infant brain in the womb makes 250,000 neurons a minute. Quarter of a million neurons a minute. See, these processes can be fast. Let's watch a DNA molecule replicating itself. If we sort of took this up to everyday life level, this is happening faster than the jet plane was traveling across the Pacific. It's taking one molecule and making another, going through a helicase here. But you're going to have some stability if evolution is going to proceed. You're going to have feed loops, feedback loops. You're going to have some equilibrium states. You're going to have a mixture. See, the general idea is that evolution can't proceed if the world is too chaotic for life support, but evolution likewise can't occur if the world is too stable to provide challenging new opportunities. And meanwhile, the paleontologists regularly speak of such things as the Cambrian explosion. The Japanese molecular biologist thinks that information has increased over billions of years at about 1/3 of a bit per reproductive generation. Here's Doug Irwin at the Smithsonian Institution in the United States. After the Permian mass extinctions, there was an explosion in marine diversity with similar changes on land. Here's Philip Singor, a geologist at UC Davis. A spectacular diversification in the Cenozoic area, the more modern era, over the past 100 million years. Here are a couple of others. Paul Taylor, Natural History Museum, London, a colleague at the University of Durham. Highly creative phases in evolutionary history. How does this happen? Now here's, to my mind, the best philosopher of biology in the last century, John Maynard Smith, unfortunately died last year. You've got to realize that heredity is about the transmission of information. And he and a colleague here think they can sort of pinpoint pivotal changes in the course of evolution. What for example? Well, you got to get the genetic code itself going first, don't you? Then it turns out they think to be dramatically important when it gets concentrated into a nucleus. That's when we get what we call eukaryotes. Evolutionary information concentrated in the nucleus dramatically escalates the capacity to store and process it. Sex, meiotic sex. What that means is that lines don't just span out and fan out, lines crisscross, right? Which makes the rapid transmission of information possible, crisscrossing line. Cellular life, where the lungs do one thing and the kidney does something else. Animal societies, and especially human societies, they think are critical points of the transmission of information. What are we getting? We're getting the picture now of evolutionary history. Yes, in many ways it's random, accidental, but it needs best to be seen as an explosive information process. James Shapiro, University of Chicago, the genome is a highly sophisticated storage system, but the evolution of that genome is highly sophisticated information processing. Here's Christian de Duve, Belgian Nobel Prize winner. Speaks of landmarks on the pathways of life, which he calls singularities, by which he means life must pass through certain transition points where it's channeled. There'll be some similar singularities, and he also says there's fantastic good luck. Right? Excellent scholars, one of them sort of says these transitions are not to be expected. Darwinism doesn't predict them. But the other says, no, they are to be expected. Darwin spoke of descent with modification. I think we also have to recognize an ascent with modification. Here's Maynard Smith again. only two systems in the world in which you can indefinitely elaborate information: the genetic system and human language. Here's Manfred Eigen, a thermodynamicist, Nobel Prize winner. Life is information, a dynamic state organized by information. Here's Mark Kirshner, John Gearhart, UC Berkeley, Harvard. They want to talk about facilitated variation. The genes are producing a future that doesn't yet exist, and the genes are good at throwing forward resources using what we now use ourselves for genetic modification, right? Using those enzymes to explore future possibilities. The factors, physics, the chemistry, carbon, the oxygen, get converted into actors. And these actors, with this facilitated variation, generate trial and error solutions. Picture then is of generate and test. We're saying that goes on in genetic systems. I think that's what mainly goes on at the National University of Singapore, doesn't it? What you're doing in the philosophy department, what you're doing in the mathematics department, what you're doing in physics is generating and testing ideas. Maybe you can say these come from the bottom up. They do. But when you get multicellularity with a lot of complexity and diversity, you begin to get some surprises. You begin to get top-down exploration. You begin to get co-option. Co-option is, when a molecule made for one purpose gets co-opted and put to use doing something else. You're hearing me speak this afternoon, with molecules in your ears that began in cells in fishes when they were rubbing up against a hard rock, for example. But they get taken over and converted to other functions. You are seeing me this evening with eyes that see well, I hope. But many of the molecules that you're using in your eye began doing other things and happened to be crystalline and put to work in the eye. See? So we begin to get surprises in evolutionary history. And yet, it's a surprising advance. Here's Ernst Mayr, kind of the grandfather, great-grandfather of American biologist until his death last year. An advance from single cell to multiple cells, plants and animals, warm-blooded from cold-blooded, small brains, larger brains, very large brains, parental care. Well, if you don't like words, look at pictures. Here, M.J. Benton's graphs, you can't interpret all these pictures, just get a feel for it. This is all organisms, land and sea, over evolutionary time, high and low estimates. On land, life doesn't begin on land till Ordovician and Silurian times. In the sea, well, you kind of got a flat spot in the middle of that graph, don't you? But that's when life went onto land. Look at a series of 3 graphs. You can't read these names, and perhaps if you could, you wouldn't understand what they mean, but they're lycopods and some ferns in there. But you're looking at Silurian and Devonian times. Well, the number of species rises and falls. But let's go forward in evolutionary time. Carboniferous to the lower Cretaceous, and you've got cycads, and you've got ferns and lycopods in here, and some pine trees already. Well, it looks like it's kind of flat on top, right? Not much increase. And if you come to more modern times, you get a graph that looks like this. But you probably weren't watching the scales with these 3 graphs, right? This is the most recent in evolutionary time, and in the middle times there's this scale, and put the scale, right, you get this kind of picture over evolutionary time. Well, looks like a kind of persistent increase. Now this is plants. If you look at animals, it looks something like this. Well, what are we going to say? Are we going to say, well, yes, it happens, but it's always there. It's always going to happen. It's somehow hanging around in the Big Bang. It's somehow the quarks are waiting around to become elephants. Is that it? Or are we going to say something is introducing new possibilities of order? Right? Some novelty. This isn't simply linear. Yes, DNA is a linear molecule, but if you fold it a little differently, you can get, with a few changes may cause it to fold differently, you can get radically different results. You get new search space, the possibilities. This is Karl Popper, an excellent philosopher of science. The possibilities are changing all the time. We see in a new light these processes. New possibilities are created, and we become possible ourselves. Right? Possibilities which did not previously exist in this growing possibility space, and a staggering variety of organisms, including us. Well, if Karl Popper's right, I can call that a second Big Bang. But we don't yet have reached a human being, have we? A human being starts out as one cell, contains about a 10 to the 13th power cell, some 200 cell types. If I could, it'd be a pretty skinny thread, but if I could uncoil all the DNA in your body, it would reach to the sun and back over 6 times. Stuart Kaufman, theoretical biologist, utterly remarkable that we have systems acting in their own behalf with value and meaning in this second Big Bang. For that we need neurons, don't we? Well, we got neurons already in jellyfish with diffuse nervous systems. We don't know when neurons originated, but we got some ideas. But first they were diffuse, then you get central nervous systems. Life gets psyched up, as it was. And that sort of comes to a head, so to speak, in the human mind. What do we have? We have a universe that's a kind of setup of the first Big Bang. We have a universe that's kind of a, well, information explosion in the second Big Bang and gets, if you like, some of its trajectories, but by no means all. It smarts up. And now we can think about, well, you see a lot of bodily changes perhaps there, but I'm not interested in what's going on in those bodies. I'm interested in what's going on in that head. The mind's Big Bang. Well, here's a graph of the increase of brain size. It takes a kind of dramatic change, doesn't it? Ed Wilson says, no organ in the history of life has grown faster. Steve Doris, University of Chicago Genetics, human evolution has a dramatic increase in brain size and complexity. Here's a group, 200 geneticists, one of two groups that decoded the human genome. And what do they say when they conclude their write-up? Well, they kind of surprises them that the gene types, many of the gene processes between humans and animals are very similar. But they don't correlate very well with behavioral differences. Between humans and chimps, neuroanatomies are almost indistinguishable. Yet, the modifications that gave humans brain expansion and throat, giving rise to language, gave us a massive singularity. Isn't that an interesting term? An interesting term coming from geneticists. The geneticists who decoded the human genome then turned around and got surprised at how smart they were, that they could do it in comparison with any chimpanzees. The chimpanzees are not likely anytime soon to decode their own genome. Massive singularity of difference. The real challenge of biology will lie ahead as we seek to explain how our minds come to organize our thoughts well enough to decode our own genome. Or here's Bruce Lawn, University of Chicago. There's a big distinction. Humans required a level of selection that's unprecedented. Humans occupy a unique position in the tree of life. Evolution has been working very hard to produce us humans. Michael Gazzaniga, neuroscientist, the differences are light years apart. See, what have I got? I got neuroscientists, I've got geneticists saying, well, yes, humans evolved from animals, but humans are light years apart from animals in many ways. It has to do with emergence of consciousness, but of course animals are conscious. How do you get consciousness out of materials that were once in rock? Jerry Foto says, nobody has the slightest idea what it would be like to have the slightest idea. How you can get conscious experience out of matter. And yet there have been explosive state changes with the human mind. We don't know when we got a human mind. It's part of our ignorance is revealed in the wide time span in which we think we might have become human. When we get a human mind, the genes can't do it. Now, genes make the infant mind. I just said that genes make an enormous number, rapidly, of brain cells, but the genes can't wire up the mind because the mind is too complicated, too complex for genes to do it, except in a preliminary fashion. We've got a huge number of neurons. Each of them has a huge number of synapses. Here's Wolfgang Enard, the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Particularly interesting gene expressions in the human brain, striking differences between us and the chimps. Much of this has to do with what we call a theory of mind. Humans have a theory of mind, chimps don't have one. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can understand a theory of mind if you've been listening to me, because ideas have been passing from my mind to your mind, I hope. Right? That's theory of mind. You know there are ideas in my mind. I know there are ideas in your mind. Perhaps in a moment in question and answer sessions we can exchange these ideas. Okay. Now the idea is that that's not possible elsewhere in the animal world. Humans learn in ways that non-human animals do not. They have very powerful forms of social cognition. They can participate in the perspective of others. Michael Tomasello, Emory University. Or here's a Japanese primate researcher. There's no overt teaching behavior in chimpanzees. Teaching is going on all over this university. Teaching is going on right this minute, I hope. Well, you may say, well, don't young chimpanzees watch what their parents are doing and imitate them? Yes, they do. Lots of animals imitate their parents. That's not teaching. In teaching, the teacher has to observe where the disciple is doing it wrong and correct it, and so forth. See, the whole idea is it's a two-way flow of information, and we just don't see that in chimpanzee mothers in the wild. Though some people think that with chimps in captivity, they can teach chimps to teach. But the idea now is we don't find it in the wild. Bennett Galef, McMaster University. Teaching, strictly human, reverses the flow of information. The child observes the parent. The disciple observes the expert and imitates the expert. But in teaching, the expert observes the novice and modifies the behavior of the novice. Relatively clear, say Mark Hauser, Noam Chomsky, Tecumseh Fitch, looking at animals for research for a century, that they don't have the linguistic capacities we have with which we can teach. The primate system never takes on the open-ended properties of language. Well, you may say, well, I read a book about 30 years ago about vervet monkeys, 25 years ago. They got different words for snakes, leopards, and eagles, don't they? And that's what the researchers said for a period of time. But now, Hauser and Fitch say, no, those are not words. You can't consider them intentional. I mean, I'm walking through the woods and I see a snake and I say, ooh, and I see a bird in the sky and I say, ooh, or I see a wolf and I say, woo, right? Those are noises, but they aren't really words. Now, they're saying these are not words, and it's a mistake to think they are. You're going to be taught in some of your classes in this university, I think, that in a certain sense, with the coming of Galileo, humans were displaced from central focus. We got here late. Humans are sort of lonely in this universe. Copernicus said Earth isn't at the center of things. Darwin said humans are not specially created. Watson and Crick may have said we're nothing but organized molecules in our genetics. Maybe Freud said we don't even know our own minds. Ralston says, well, yes, but it does look as though humans are at the center of complexity. Maybe we're cosmic dwarfs. We're still pretty big on the molecular scale. Maybe we are infinitely complex. You're going to be taught in some of your classes that the tree of life is pretty bushy. You don't want to convey the idea that humans are at the top. Well, I'm going to say, okay, call it a bush of life if you want, but there's been an explosion in a bud on the bush. Somehow humans have crossed into a new realm of power and freedom. Here's Terry Deacon, UC Berkeley. Hundreds of millions of years, thousands of species, yes, they have brains, tens of thousands of species can learn complex skills, but only one has ever attended a philosophy lecture wondering about its place in the world. Only one has the ability to do so. Figuring out this explosion of mind is said to be the hardest part in science. Distinctiveness, again, is that ideas pass from mind to mind. We have knowledge of what Descartes wrote a long time ago, of what Plato wrote. We have knowledge of what somebody in Germany said last night. Well, some people say that chimps can watch another chimp and know that that chimp knows where the bananas are. Maybe that's something like a theory of mind. Immediate mind, call it. But humans have this ideational mind, right? I know that you know the Pythagorean theorem, and I don't. And you can teach it to me. And it goes back to Pythagoras. Well, let's not be too unappreciative of animal minds. A pinhead of mouse cortex has got a couple of kilometers of axons in it. Humans have multiplied mouse brains about 3,000 times. Humans multiply chimpanzee brains about 3 to 4 times. If I took out all these are the fibers in your brain cells, the axons on one end, the dendrites on another, strung them together, I could wrap the parts of your brain around the earth 40 times. Seth Grant says the postsynaptic side of the synapse is the most complex part, molecularly complex part of the body. Big numbers, you got a lot of atoms in your brain. Well, you might say, wait a minute, we were just saying there are 10 to the 80th power of protons. That doesn't sound like all that many atoms in the brain. But your brain is organized so that you can have enormous numbers of synaptic connections, right? This is the number of possible thoughts, at least the number of permutations, making thoughts in your brain. I mean, this number alone ought to convince you that you can graduate from the National University of Singapore if you're in doubt. We have what are called mutable maps. We have ways in which our brains begin to shape and reshape our own brains. Michael Merzenich, we can reshape our own brain machinery. We did that with violin players. These are young women, 13 years age or more, studied in the UK for 3 or 4 years, and you have to use the two hands differently when you finger a violin and draw it back and forth. And they discovered these young women remapped their brains with resolute practice over a few years. I always thought the taxi drivers in London were pretty smart. They discovered the same thing. It takes about 3 or 4 years to learn how to sort of have a customer step in your cab and say, take me to number 10 Downing Street or any other address in London, and take them there, right? Taxi drivers remap their brains, and so do jugglers. And many of you have learned a second language. You remap your brain. Reading remaps your brain, that we discover in children, or learning to read as an adult remaps your brain. We've got lots of theories by which we instrument our intelligence. We learn about quarks, about quasars. We learn about distances across 40 orders of magnitude, from picometers to the extent of the visible universe. We learn about the 4 fundamental forces with strengths across 40 orders of magnitude. We learn about time across 34 orders of magnitude. See, there's a way in which humans can remarkably transcend their native range when they think about attoseconds, or when they think about billions of years. We transcend our own sector. We can think about how Earth is seen from space. We can take pictures of Earth from space. When we find elephants, we can realize they have a low-frequency communication. We can listen to lectures about the 3 Big Bangs. Well, it would seem, from a Darwinian point of view, that intelligence ought to have been selected for survival, and we certainly hope it does, but much of what we do with it sort of isn't devoted to leaving more offspring in the next generation. A few years back, we had a celebrated proof of a long-standing conjecture about the way to transform a rough area into a rounded area, and that just doesn't have anything to do, right, with Darwinian survival. Ed Wilson spent his career studying ants. That's not giving Ed Wilson more children in the next generation. Right? Humans have enormous capacities to do things taking up worldviews. In a certain sense, we're free spirits. We are self-transcending spirits. We have creeds, ideologies. We defend our rights. We worry about our responsibilities. Maybe we worship God or follow a different sort of religion. In all this, we are remarkably distinct from the other millions of species. Sometimes it helps to have a little background music in your life. Radically different kind of species. Well, we've got a movement, if you like, from nature to spirit. You can think about where we have come and perhaps why. Is it all sort of inevitable in the system? Are there sort of surprising one-off events? looks to me like each of the three Big Bangs, each of the two preceding Big Bangs, is necessary but not sufficient for the next. Well, are we here by chance? Or are we here by probability? Some tendencies, headings, attractions in the system, by necessity, even some say by design. I'm not sure we have these answers. A lot is still over our head, but part of my conviction is that what's in our heads is as significant as what's over our heads. Einstein thought the eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility. I don't disagree, but Ralston thinks also that the eternal mystery is this generation of comprehending mind. Well, have you ever been to London? Mind. A gap. Mind. A great explosion. Science gives us three principal data points: matter, energy, life, and mind. Matter energy is all over the universe. Life is rare. Maybe it's not only on Earth, but it's quite rare. The third is a singularity, and we are it. Well, you may say each of the steps precedes the precedent. Most of my friends would probably say there's no supernature, but nature is supercharged. That may be a plausible account. It is in some way a plausible account. But I think we can also say supercharged nature might signal a kind of transcendent presence. Or if we wanted to use an ancient word, a kind of logos, in, with, and under this marvelous universe. A presence that embraces our presence. Well, it's all there in three Big Bangs, and there's a copy on the table. If you want to stand up a few minutes, we can, you can stretch, and then we can continue this conversation a bit longer. So why don't you take 30 seconds, 45 seconds to get your breath. Maybe I will do the same. Are you going to moderate or accelerate, or?
I sure will. Hey, with all those possible thoughts out there, some of you might have some to share with us. Anyone?
I don't mean to overwhelm you. Yes.
Thanks for that talk. I have two questions just for my clarification. The first one is, we started from the stardust, and now we came back to the evolution process like life, little life. And the data and the explanation that you have presented mostly on the basis of the modern science. Now, there are some arguments that this modern science could end up human beings up to some individualistic attitude that you also said, singularity, something is one field. Now,
it's not just that modern humans are singular, but all humans are singular.
Okay. Okay. So, so it's possible that there will be a world where human beings are the unique species, but there are, in the same way, someone could argue that some non-humans and even the non-living animals could be the unique from different perspectives. For example, that when if we see the cosmic evolution process or the universal, sometimes the universal theories that explaining how these planets are forming and how these planets are moving around the sun this way. So there maybe someone could think that okay, these are more unique than the human beings from others' perspective. So why should we stop up to the life? Why not we consider that some other matter energy that you started from the stardust, that if we go to the stardust, that could be even more broader idea. Why should we limit our broader perspective up to the life? That's the first question. And the second...
No, let's take them one at a time. I think your question is, maybe in outer space there might be living beings that are smarter than we are, or there might be beings as smart as we are.
Maybe some matter.
Yeah. And if that turns out to be the case, I will be pleased. So I'm not denying that life might have existed elsewhere, and that intelligent life might today exist elsewhere. I don't think that will make us less important. In the first place, even if there's life elsewhere, it's going to be quite rare. It looks like it may not be present in our solar system at all. It might, but it looks like it's not going to be found. It's almost certain that there will not be found intelligent life in our solar system. But there are other stars. The other stars are at great distance. The nearest star is 4 light years away. And most of these stars on which there might be life are so far away that it's unlikely we can ever know much about it, that we could ever travel there. Now perhaps we could pick up signals from these distant places, and if we could learn to translate the signals, then we might know a good deal about what this other form of life is like. But we don't see that anywhere on the immediate horizon. The kind of life that we are, the kind of life that we would be able to detect is the least likely kind there is out there. That's to say, the kind of life we could detect with radio signals would have to be highly intelligent life that could produce signals that could be transmitted across space. Okay, Earth is 5 billion years old. For how many years in the history of life on Earth has anything been transmitting radio signals that could be detected in space? Right? 50, maybe. 50 out of 5 billion years on this planet. See, with those kinds of odds, it's hard to think that we will pick up much in the way of detailed knowledge of life elsewhere. So it might be there, we might find out, we might welcome it. That doesn't make what's here unimportant. What's here, the richness of life on this planet, is still a dramatic and surprising development, even if there are similarly dramatic and surprising developments elsewhere. So, my sort of response is, we don't know, it's okay if there's life elsewhere, but I don't think that makes us insignificant. Your second question.
The second question is about the teaching process or the teaching method that you said.
Yeah.
That you said that is actually a process that's two-dimensional. Means the teachers have to correct their principles. Yeah, their principles. But sometimes it's possible that no corrections is needed. For example, in the history of the evolution process, human beings came much later. So when human beings came in this earth, they found other animals or the trees, everything like their neighbors. So when they actually learned from their neighbors. For example, the monkeys and the baboons, they saw that, okay, baboons eating the fruits and throw the seeds to the soil, to the land. And human beings then captured this, okay, we can grow crops like this. So they tried this way, agriculture and all these things. That in the history of evolution process, the agriculture came in this way. So there is actually, is it not possible that one-dimensional teaching is?
Well, again, it depends a lot sort of on how you use words. And there are some people who say that the infant ape that watches its mother take a rock and crack a nut, or take a grass stick and stick it in a hole, and ants come out and it eats the ant. They think that the mother is teaching the infant. If you want to use the word teaching in that context, I suppose you can. But most of the people that I now read don't want to call that teaching. They call that imitating behavior. And imitating behavior is quite widespread in the animal world. And he gave you examples from chimpanzees. But young birds, when they are learning to sing, they try to sing. They spontaneously try to sing, but they don't sing very well. But when they listen to other adult birds sing, they sing better. And so they sort of pick up the sorts of songs that are successful for them to sing when they listen to others. But most students would not think that the adult birds are teaching the young to sing. And when a mother raises an infant child, the child is just always copying things that the parents are doing, often that the parent doesn't want to be copied, but they get copied anyway. So the idea of just sort of copying behavior is not thought to constitute teaching. We even have a phrase to ape something. If I'm aping you, I'm just sort of imitating your behavior. Okay, by these accounts, teaching needs more. Teaching needs not simply for me to copy what the adult is doing, but for the adult to observe the child and to come and correct it and take out the big stone and put a small stone in and kind of show the juvenile what it's doing wrong. And that sort of behavior we think isn't present. Now there are a couple of things that people have called teaching, and surprisingly they don't occur with primates. But there are certain situations where animals, the ones that I know of, they cripple prey. So there's an animal in Africa, a meerkat, and they catch kind of bugs and eat them. But they like to eat scorpions, but scorpions are dangerous to catch. Okay. So the parent meerkats may cripple a scorpion, which makes it easier for the juvenile to catch. Well, lots of animals and other animals cripple prey, and their young find it easier to catch. Are these parents teaching? Okay. Now it turns out to be even a little more complicated. It turns out that the meerkats will severely cripple a scorpion if the youngster is very young. But if the youngster is half grown, they cripple a scorpion less severely. Are they teaching? Well, the researchers who did this say no, they don't think they're teaching. They don't think they're teaching because they don't have any, they think this is just a selected, evolved behavior, and they don't think the meerkats in their mind are doing any thinking about, well, we should cripple this scorpion a little bit for Junior, and we should cripple this scorpion a lot more for Big Sister. They don't find any evidence that they're thinking about what they're doing. And they cite, for example, ants. Do you think ants teach? Well, ants need to follow trails, and ants give out certain signals, emit certain smells that enable other ants to follow the trails. And it turns out that they emit different amounts of this signal substance if the followers are juvenile, and they emit less of it when the followers are more grown up. Right? Is that teaching? Well, we just don't think that there's enough neurons in an ant's mind to have this concept of treating differently the senior juveniles and younger juveniles. Well, I'm making a long explanation of this, but perhaps you're getting the idea that many things that teaching requires the intentional passing of ideas from mind to mind, not simply imitated behavior. Even if you want to say, okay, that's teaching, the meerkats teach, the ants teach, the mother chicken who scratches and chick, 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 and the little chicks come running up and scratch, and the mother chick is teaching. If you call that teaching, then you need another word, super teaching, right, for what humans can do and animals can't do, right? Humans do enormous amounts of passing of ideas from mind to mind. That's the essential basis of culture. Animals can learn imitated behaviors and pass them along a generation or two, perhaps, but you are embodying, learning things that have been taught for thousands of years across many oceans, right? There's just nothing remotely similar to that in animal behavior. That's why Michael ORGANISER says we are light years different from anything found in animals. Yeah. Back here first.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed the presentation. I also have two questions, but they're very much related. I was really happy, but also a bit surprised to see that you showed this scene from Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
Because I think the whole idea of the ape or the monkey catching the bone is like a metaphor for, well, early stage man having a kind of technology and bringing himself into space. Which brings me to the first question, which is related to a German philosopher. His name is Peter Sloterdijk, or Peter Sloterdijk. Don't know if you know him.
I don't immediately recognize the name, no.
Well, his thesis more or less is, says something like, man made himself because he had the ability to use technology. And he gives the example of fire, like we use fire and we're able to have meat, bake meat, make it more healthy, hence our brain we're in a position to grow so fast, as you explained. And in your talk, you totally ruled out technology. So I was wondering if you would...
Why did I totally rule out technology? I showed you the bone in space which turns into a spaceship.
But you didn't really explain. So, but
I mean, I thought I repeatedly said that ideas pass from mind to mind to mind. That's not simply in philosophy, right? We stand on the shoulders of giants. Ideas pass from mind to mind is what science and technology is all about. Okay, but keep going. I mean, I've got a lot about technology, but this is not a book about technological advancement. But keep going.
No, I was asking because, well, now I may be incorrect again, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But it seemed that you were looking for another explanation for Homo sapiens as we are right now. And I tasted, I think that you're a religious man.
I am.
And it seems to me that you try to incorporate, like, God into philosophy and explanation of life. Now, I know there's this large discussion in the United States about intelligent design. And my second question is, what would be, according to you, like, the effect if intelligent design would be taught at primary and secondary schools? So the effect of intelligent design of scientific development.
I used the word design once, I think, in this talk. I would have hoped that it was pretty clear in the talk that I accept evolutionary history. I tried to show you graphs of evolutionary history. I talked about genetics. I talked about critical points in the changes in evolutionary history. And I don't want to deny that evolutionary history has taken place over billions of years of life on Earth. If I left that impression, I need to revise the talk. At the same time, I do not think that an evolutionary account is a complete explanation of what has happened. In the first place, of course, evolution has only natural selection, Darwinian evolution, has only taken place on Earth. So you've got billions of years of activities in space that do not take place by natural selection. You can speak, if you like, of evolution of stars, but you don't mean Darwinian natural selection at all. So in that sense, we have a massive phenomenon, the appearance of the universe with its characteristics, which is pre-Darwinian or non-Darwinian. Then, even with life on Earth, which I do think took place by Darwinian accounts, I don't think that a Darwinian account is a complete explanation. Why not? Because the Darwinians are undecided amongst themselves, right? Whether an increase of complexity is probable, improbable, surprising. They are undecided amongst themselves whether humans are surprising, unsurprising, inevitable, probable. See, the Darwinian model simply says that those survive who leave the most genes in the next generation. Period. Doesn't make any difference whether you are a whale or a beetle or a dandelion or a rain tree, right? You survive if you leave the most genes in the next generation. Okay? And many biologists say that's silent about whether there will be diversity or whether there will be complexity. And then they give all kinds of, say, oh, well, of course, if it goes on for a long period of time, then it's not surprising that there will be a lot of different ways of doing this. They may say, well, if it goes on for a long period of time, then it's not surprising that some of them will be smarter. I don't think that a strict Darwinian account is a full explanation of many of these surprising events. And, you know, in the book I've got biologists quoted on both sides of this. If you just want to, take Stephen Jay Gould. Stephen Jay Gould, almost every month for 25 years in natural history in the United States, said something to the effect that it's all an accident, marvelous accident, but accident. Stephen Jay Gould, good biologist at Harvard University, wrote a book, Wonderful Life, based on the fossils in the Burgess Shale. Who else studied the Burgess Shale? Right? Simon Conway Morris, Cambridge paleontologist, studies the same fossils and reaches radically different conclusions. And they argue with each other about it. I gave you John Maynard Smith, excellent philosopher of science. He thinks that all the stages in life, which he thinks are so important, the concentration of the genetic material in the nucleus, or the coming of multiple cell organisms, the coming of language, the coming of acquired learning. He doesn't think any of that can be predicted from Darwinian natural selection. Good philosopher, Bob. Right? But you can turn right around and get Christian de Duve, Belgian biologist, Nobel Prize winner, who thinks just the opposite. He thinks it's all in some sense inevitable. Okay, so I'm saying in essence here that the outcome of this is, if you like, open. You can read it both ways. You can put different spins on it. All I really want to argue in this book is that nothing known in science today shuts out the possibility of religious interpretations.
But the question was what it would mean if intelligent design or creation would be taught at primary schools.
Yeah. What it means for the teaching in primary schools is not the teaching of intelligent design in biology classes. No. What it means is that intelligently educated students, and this may not yet happen at grade 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? They may be too young for that. But you're not well educated until you know these deeper issues about how to interpret the three big bangs, until you know the philosophical issues, the ethical issues surrounding these biological disputes. I don't know that that belongs in the biology classroom. I think many biologists don't feel competent to do that. If you don't get that somewhere in your curriculum, right? Philosophy department, literature, art, history, I don't know, social studies, right? If you don't somewhere learn to critique the sciences, if you don't somewhere learn to think about the meaning and significance of the sciences, you don't have an examined life that's worth living. That you do need to prepare for, to get students set up for, to have a curriculum that's waking up students to think about the big questions. You need that in elementary school education. Doesn't mean that every biology teacher's got to teach intelligent design. No.
Next big question.
I had a similar question. Basically what I felt was that you took all those facts and figures which suggested that how human beings evolved. Since it's so improbable, your conclusion was that something must have happened. Now, couldn't you just conclude that probably science hasn't evolved to an extent where it could explain this in probably like 50 or 100 years? We could have an explanation, a logical, rational explanation for that, other than saying that our presence is surrounded by someone else's presence. Like, don't you think that the logical explanation would be, let's wait it out and watch, rather than say, this is the best thing we have, let's cling on to this?
Well, you're a young man. You can wait and watch, right? I haven't got 50 years to wait. But you're not that young. You're going to have to act now and in the next 10 years with a set of values based on a worldview. So I don't think we can always wait for these big questions to be answered. I think sometimes you have to act the best you can on the basis of what you sort of now see. It might be that 50 years from now, 500 years from now, we will have a good explanation of how chimpanzees or predecessors of chimpanzees evolved into humans and what all the mental steps were. Would it be different? I think in a way you don't. You would have to wonder if you understand the openness of the future. This is co-option. This is serendipity. Things happen which I think cannot be predicted because they're not there to be predicted. I've got a more open-ended view of things like that. So I think that in the next 100 years, in the next 500 years, humans may make decisions that take us along paths that go in one direction, making certain kinds of discoveries, and we do not take other kinds of paths in which we would have made other kinds of discoveries. So there's a way in which I don't think that what we will find out is inevitable. Maybe we can find out the past, for sure what happened, but it doesn't even follow then that if we had been there in the past, it had to happen that way. I've got a more open-ended view of life being on a kind of adventure than that. And we're on the kind of adventure in which we have to act out our stories now. We can't wait for all these problems to be settled.
We have time for one more question, and then we can enjoy some refreshments out in the hallway. Is there such a question?
But did you have a second question?
Maybe a foot drink.
I have one.
Good.
Good.
So let's look out the
yeah. Okay, my question is this. It's about this, the key idea behind this metaphor of the three Big Bangs is this idea of non-linearity, I think.
Yeah,
right?
non-linearity.
So
Radical transformation.
So the idea is that you've got some discrete event that's needed to set off each bang because the previous one, in some sense, left the next one.
Relative to discrete. I don't necessarily mean instantaneous.
Oh, okay. So
but you've got some critical thresholds crossed.
Well, I want to ask about the third one. My question is about the third one because, I mean, in that one in particular, I don't know how to tell the difference between a situation where we have a relatively discrete break or a discontinuity, a singularity, versus a situation where we have a kind of a broad continuum that's characterized by big variation between minds that have this kind of feature and minds that have some other kind of features, so-called higher level and lower level ones. And so I guess I'm a little worried about identifying human minds, I can recognize that they're much, much better, I guess. I guess I endorse that. But that they're not just merely along some kind of broad continuum, that it's actually kind of a bang. It's something I'd like you to talk a little more about.
Do you think that quantitative differences can accumulate into qualitative differences?
That's a good question.
I do.
Okay. I can. Yeah, I can see how the argument goes.
Daylight slowly becomes dark. But daylight is very different from dark. Right? So I think there can be transition zones that are more critical than others. We see lots of that. You know, water turns into ice, and ice melts. Doesn't melt all instantaneously, but there's a transition zone, a critical threshold. Ice is water for a while, and ice crosses a transition zone and becomes steam. So there are singularity points of various kinds. Maybe it takes 10,000 years to transition across these points. And maybe there are incremental changes. But the incremental changes result in qualitative differences. And that's sort of what I'm after with this metaphor. You know, don't you think, let me push the question back, that there is something startlingly different about life and the life processes and what goes on the moon and Jupiter and Mars?
Fine.
You do.
I mean, when I asked my question, I said that I'm prepared to accept that human minds are the better ones. But I guess some people might deny that. I don't know. I'm not really worried about this, but I guess that some might worry that this is a little bit self-serving, right? Our ways of experiencing the natural world just turn out to be the best. And hey, look at us, we're the ones making the judgment about which ways of experiencing the world happen to be the best. And, but my question was slightly different. But that's a different kind of concern.
Well, I've gotten that criticism of this book, right?
Oh.
Ralston has a way of figuring out how to put himself up front. Is that what I did? I put myself up front?
No, that's a little unfair.
Humans are the big troublemaker on the planet, aren't they? You got to come around Thursday when I continue these talks. We're entering the Anthropocene epoch, we arrogantly say. The epoch in which the destiny of the planet is shaped by humans. Right? We're not afraid of bats taking over the planet. We might be afraid of malaria germs taking over the planet or something. But there is something dramatically different about human powers. First species, right, in 40 million centuries to put the basic planetary processes in jeopardy. Tremendous powers for good and for evil. I was kind of surprised when I wrote the book, how I get hold of neuroscientists and can find them saying things I didn't think they could say. Michael Gazzaniga, humans are light years apart. Light years, that's almost too much for me. Right? I'm in your boat then, right? The light year, are we that far apart? Well, it's a metaphor. He used it. Okay.
Thank you very much, and please join me in